Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Stand Up, where each and every day I interview the smartest experts in the world because somehow I'm able to get them to join me here on the show over and over. Yet today, for the first time, Dr. Allison Gill. You're absolutely going to love my conversation with her and just her. She's so good. This week is going to be a little bit different in terms of the format of the show because I'm going to be running around getting my daughter up to camp orientation. Also, it's graduation from high school tomorrow. My parents are in town, and I'm going to be taping a whole bunch of great interviews. So I'll have awesome guests and several great interviews this week. But in terms of the extras with news and production, maybe not going to get to it because I'm going to be so busy this week. I do hope to see you at our Thursday night hangout. But other than that, mostly the guests this week. Expect some great guest interviews this week and expect me to spend the rest of the time working on family stuff because it's going to be crazy. Ava graduates from high school tomorrow, and it's just all very busy this week. So I hope you love my conversation with Allison Gill right now. She is the host of the Mueller, She Wrote podcast, the Daily Beans podcast, Clean Up on Aisle 45, and now the new podcast, which is a huge hit, Jack, a special counsel podcast with Allison Gill and Andrew McCabe. You can follow her on social media where she is huge, and that's all more information in the show notes. So let's do it right now. For the first time, Dr. Allison Gill joining me right here on Stand Up. Boom, there she is, Dr. Allison Gill, or as her friends and fans call her, many of us, AG. Hello and welcome.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited to finally get you on here. I've seen you in person a couple of times at Glenn Kirshner's events the last 2 years, and I've been wanting to talk to you and drag my feet, and I finally narrowed you down, you very busy human being.
It only took 2 years, right?
Yeah, well, we're doing it. So I'm psyched to have you and psyched to talk to you. You're a Ph.D. People don't necessarily always know that or think that. What do you have that in? How did you get that? Why did you do that?
I have a doctorate in health administration that I started shortly after I started to work for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Obama, when he was campaigning, did the JFK thing, ask not what your country can do for you, be of service to your country. And I was like, well, I'm a disabled veteran. I can't go back into the military. So I'll work for the VA and I'll help veterans get timely access to quality care. So I got to take the same oath of office, the executive oath of office, on the same day as Obama did, January 20th, 2009, also my birthday. And
oh, wow.
And then I started to work for the VA. I started out as a clerk and worked my way up to the liaison for the Department of Veterans Affairs to the Department of Defense. It was a great career, but it was cut short by the Trump administration. So we can talk about that too.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to get to that. You brought us there, but I want to tease that. Let's go back. When and why did you join the military?
Oh, I joined the military. I signed up in 94. I came in to basic training in 95, and then I had to wait for A school to start. So I was given shore duty as my job was to transport prisoners back and forth from the brig to their hearings. I did that for most of that year. And then I went down to Orlando from Great Lakes to start A school for nuke machinist mate, which was my rate. And then I went to Nuke Power School, and I graduated in June of 96. And,
Nuclear Power School. Stop talking like we know what that is, and certainly don't use short, like Nuke Power School. But okay, Nuclear Power School, huh? Nothing else worked out?
Yeah, it's my fallback career. Nuclear Power School is where you go to learn how to, I guess, basically operate a nuclear reactor. I was a machinist mate, so my job was in the, pump maintenance and the primary and secondary reactor systems and things like that. Before I got to prototype, which is like on the job training, though, I survived a very brutal rape, and I had to deal with that. I was sort of bullied out of reporting what had happened, and sort of kept it a secret because I was told that I could be discharged, bad conduct discharged, lose all my benefits, lose my rate, lose my pay, lose everything. They threatened me with court martial for adultery because my rapist was married. And this is all very common. These are common threats that happen. If you've ever seen the movie The Invisible War, which I appeared in 2012, it's very common to be threatened like that out of reporting. So after I graduated,
especially within the military specifically, this has been some people call it an epidemic. What you're saying has been reported over and over. I didn't realize that, or if I did realize that happened to you, I'm sorry that I didn't know or blocked it out. But I mean, the point is you're illustrating with your horrible experience something that my understanding is commonplace.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, after I graduated from power school, before I went to on-the-job training, there was something wrong with my feet. And the Navy said, we need to either perform surgery on your feet or you need to get out of the Navy. And I took that opportunity to get out of the Navy because, rape they consider it basically an occupational hazard at that time. So, but, that was a very long time ago, 26 years ago now. But it compelled me to work for the VA to help other survivors of military sexual trauma. And it compelled me to write recently, last year, right after the Dobbs leak decision leaked, I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post asking for Lloyd Austin, who's the Secretary of Defense, to approve all leave for people who need to travel out of states where abortion is banned to get abortions. And 4 months later, he enacted that policy.
Wow, Allison.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that you wrote that piece. I'm looking it up right now. Jeez. Wow. I'm so happy that you openly share your experience and what you've just told me. Why do you do that? Why do you talk about it and write about it? And how has that been for you?
Well, the first time I told anybody about this outside of my therapist at the VA was when I was interviewed for The Invisible War. And when I went to the premiere, I had no idea how they were going to use my information or my interview. But what happened was I saw they put me in a montage of a bunch of other people, women and men, who experienced the exact same kind of retaliation and threats when they tried to report their rape. And that was the first time I felt like I wasn't alone and that I wasn't crazy and I wasn't, confusing things in my head because, they make you feel like it's your fault. And that allowed me to basically, it stripped away anyone's ability to gaslight me on it.
Mm.
And when I had that amazing feeling of not being alone, I wanted to share that feeling as much as I could with other people to make sure that everyone knows that they aren't alone, because that is truly one of the most powerful feelings that you can have. Because like I said, it strips away the gaslighters. And that's why I got into the news. I wanted everybody to know what was going on and to have the facts and the truth so that they couldn't be gaslit by, the former Trump administration. And so that's kind of why I did what I did, why I tell my story and why I do what I do now.
Wow. Very powerful. I actually interviewed Kirby Dick. The Invisible War that Allison's referring to was a documentary. For a second there, I thought it was a feature. And I was like, did I never see this movie? It was a long time ago. And so I did the interview a long time ago. But I do remember interviewing Kirby Dick about this movie now, produced by Amy Ziering and Kirby Dick, who directed and wrote it. And I remember it being the thing, that documentary, along with a whole lot of other documentaries that I learned about during my work at SiriusXM, that put this issue so front and center, sexual assault, rape in the military. It did a lot for that, and obviously put it on the map with certain legislators. There's been some really noble work being done. I'm not sure that we've made an impact, but there certainly have been senators like Kirsten Gillibrand and others who have really put it on the line and tried to make this issue more front and center and more. But it really, my understanding is we haven't made enough progress through the Pentagon, through the Department of Defense, and obviously through legislature that has made a meaningful difference or impact on the traumatic sexual assault numbers in the military. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's correct. And I also brought that up in that op-ed that I wrote. The second demand that I had was that the Senate pass the Military Justice Improvement Act. And what that does is it takes the decision out of the chain of command.
Right.
To whether or not they're going to prosecute rape. It's what Kirsten Gillibrand's been getting at since the movie came out over a decade ago. And she found Joni Ernst as a co-sponsor, and they quickly found 66 other co-sponsors.
Damn, Ted Cruz, Chuck Grassley. I'm looking at your op-ed. Damn.
Yeah, 67 other people willing to do this. And for some reason, a Democrat from Rhode Island named Jack Reed pulled it out and wanted to put it through his committee and make it part of the NDAA, which watered it down. So the chain of command still has some control over whether or not to prosecute.
Allison, did you ever get to the bottom as to why Jack Reed did that?
No, I never got to the bottom of it. I've asked and I've asked. I don't understand why it never came to the floor for a vote. If you can get 67 senators to agree on anything, take the W.
It may not be a W for everybody. That's why they didn't do it. Somebody thought it was going to be a real big loss, is my guess. Yeah, that is really frustrating to know that the votes were there for that. If I knew that, I had forgotten it. I'll go read your that whole op-ed in the Washington Post. I'll share it in the show notes. And that whole conversation, that whole issue is something that I'm really wanting to talk with you more about in the future. But getting back to your story, life, and eventually to some extent to your work now that you're doing each and every day, amazingly. Where are you when Donald Trump gets elected in life and career?
I am at a comedy club on a panel talking about the election live. I'm working at the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm in my last position as a GS-14 liaison to the Department of Defense, and I'm also doing comedy as a hobby. And so we were covering election night live at a comedy show with a bunch of other comedians. There was one comedian there that was a Donald Trump supporter. And that the day before the election, I was at Michael's and they were having their blowout sale on Halloween stuff.
Yeah, it's my place.
Halloween was over. And there's a big stuffed raven, like a crow, right? And I'm like, I'm going to get this and I'm going to bring it and I'm going to make this Trump supporter eat crow when Hillary beats him. And as I pull up to the venue and I'm looking at my stuff and I'm grabbing my gear, I see the crow and I'm like, you know what? I should probably leave that in the car.
What? I can't believe you didn't bring the crow in. I mean, I'm glad you didn't in the end because that would have sucked for you.
I would have had to have eaten it.
You would have had to eaten that crow. Well, you don't eat a lot of crow. And your analysis these days, how about that for a segue? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So what happens next?
Well, I'm working for the VA, and then all of a sudden they changed the Hatch Act rules. It's no longer you can't campaign for or against a candidate. It's that you aren't allowed to say anything bad about Trump.
If you're in the military.
If you work for the federal government.
Work for the federal, yep. And then... I'm sorry, to be clear, they changed that rule when Trump got elected. He's like, no one talks bad about me in the government.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Especially you, Gil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Cut down.
Excuse me. I didn't know if it was about me or not.
Excuse me. It's enough from you.
But I did get a little bit of information from a FOIA request that they were monitoring my social media at the cabinet level.
Well, you're a powerful and influential person. You were beginning to be. Now you're a monster.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That was a compliment. So what brought you to the end?
Well, I started the Mueller, She Wrote podcast in my kitchen. I wanted to cover, week by week.
That's what, oh, wow. I just very hard to prepare for this interview in terms of the timing of what you did. So you started that podcast after Mueller had been appointed. You're still active.
Yep, I'm still working for the VA.
Wow,
so I did it at night and on the weekends. I called myself AG. I said nobody tweet out from the account during business hours. And when we did shows and tours, it was only on nights and the weekends. And right about the time the Mueller report came out, and I was gearing up to put out a 20-part series on the findings, my two supervisors who were new, I actually was offered his job, but I turned it down in D.C. They flew out to California on your dime and invited me to the Bayfront, San Diego Wyndham Bayfront Hotel and sat me down and told me that my job was moving across the country and I could either move or I would be fired. And I opted to think about it, but I wasn't going to move because I couldn't move for the job that I turned down. I couldn't leave. I have aging parents, at the time my husband. But
my understanding, not to interrupt you, but that was a tactic that they did to a lot of people that they wanted to get rid of legally. They could not fire you, But the tactic they did is they're like, we're moving your job, and knowing that they're going to be able to get rid of a lot of the people they don't like or want, or at least put their people in. Am I right? I remember reading about that.
Yeah, here's the cool timeline, right? So right after that April meeting, I took all 12 weeks of my leave at once. Because I earned 12 weeks of leave because I've been working for over a decade. Took it all, went out on tour a little bit, did some shows. I still didn't do anything during business hours because I just didn't want to even come close to violating the Hatch Act. And then when I returned, I was told that day to, jump on a conference call. I thought it was going to be being brought up to speed on what I missed for the last 12 weeks. Instead, they informed me that they were doing a fact-finding investigation into my podcast. And that blew me away. And then that same week is when the Washington Post, it was August 6th, I think, the Washington Post 2019 put out a story about Mick Mulvaney speaking to a Republican donor saying, I've got this great new trick to get rid of non-loyal people in the government. We move their job across the country and they decide to, and then we can fire them if they don't move or they decide to quit.
Yes, it was widely reported. Sorry, that was widely reported.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was fun. Then I found out, as you know, because I pushed back, I complained. I said it was retaliatory. I filed an EEO complaint for wrongful termination, violation of my First Amendment rights, et cetera. That's still litigating, by the way. I did win my severance eventually, but I found out through that process that it was actually Trump's Office of General Counsel that was advising my supervisor on investigating my podcast.
They came for you because of your podcast.
They were trying to get me on Hatch Act violations and they couldn't find one. They were trying to get me on leave abuse. They couldn't get any. So eventually, in March of 2020, they ended up removing me for being medically unfit, was what they said, because I have PTSD.
Because you had PTSD from what?
From the rape in the military. Yeah, because I'm the only disabled veteran that works at the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Wow. That I really didn't know all those details. That is a fucking insane story. And I'm sure you're not alone, but certainly you're specific in that you're an active duty military. You're doing this podcast in your own time.
I wasn't active duty military. I was civil servant at the VA. I got out of the military back in 96 or something.
Oh, you were okay. But regardless, you're a federal government employee. Mm-hmm. Same argument, I think. And then they pushed you out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. How many years had you at that point?
11, I think.
I remember, so when did you start the podcast? Because I remember it seemingly coming out of nowhere and being extremely popular very quickly. I remember the feelings of anger, jealousy. I was like, what the hell? What the fuck? Who is this person? What is this podcast? Why is it doing so well? How do I replicate its success? And then I realized how kind of niche and brilliant it was. And then most specifically, how brilliant you were behind it. So tell me the arc of the podcast, because it got a lot of attention from a lot of really respectful people. And I just remember being very angry about that.
I'm sorry. We started in my kitchen and I had
do you know how long I've been doing this? You were just working for the federal government. Now you're dominating the space? What the hell? And a comedian? What the hell?
Sorry. I'm sorry.
You should be.
But I recruited a couple of young comedians who I'd worked with in the comedy scene. And, we didn't have any expectation of making any money. We just sort of wanted to sit around and talk Mueller. And we did it. We recorded our first episode when the indictments against Rick Gates and Paul Manafort came out. And, I wrote the show. I had segments like the Fantasy Indictment League, and we were swearing and kind of doing some funny things and coming up with nicknames for people. And I don't know, it just caught on. And by mid 2018, I had to form an LLC and started just hiring everybody and paying everybody because it got so big. And then we started the Daily Beans after the Mueller report came out. I wanted to transition from Mueller to the news. And now, if you had told me when I was sitting at the kitchen table in 2017 that 5 years from then I'd be hosting a podcast about another special counsel looking into Donald Trump with the former director of the FBI, I would have laughed at you. but here we are.
Yeah, Jack. We'll get into it. It's really good, obviously. I don't understand why you're so good at analyzing things, especially legally. Like, I get that you're smart. I get that you have a Ph.D. I get that you're a very intelligent person. But you seem to be as good at analyzing legal things as people who have a lot of experience analyzing legal things and practicing law. What am I missing about your legal expertise?
I don't know. When I was a kid, I was real argumentative, and my dad said I should be a lawyer.
But you seem to understand. You analyze like briefs. You're like going through the brief now. I'm like, who the hell are you? How do you know so much about all of this stuff? I mean, it's really excellent analysis. I feel like a lot of people come to you for their analysis. All right, enough kissing your ass. But I mean, I don't understand that is all I'm saying.
I don't either. I don't know.
Who do you, real quick, whose analysis do you like? I often go to you and a few other people. I go through your Twitter feeds, for which there are a couple. Melissa wrote, Allison Gill, now Jack, right?
Well, there's no Jack Twitter feed, but yeah.
Well, I'm going through all the stuff that you're saying and doing to see, along with a few other people, kind of on different parts of the spectrum. Who do you like and respect yourself?
I run a gamut, right? From real aggressive to real conservative. And I don't mean conservative like Republican conservative. I mean
people that all are on the same side morally and that are just on different parts of the spectrum in terms of will there be indictment? You know, what are the means of like more aggressive? I'm not sure who you're going to say. Sorry, I'll shut up.
No, it's okay. But, you know, I mean, a lot of former U.S. attorneys that I think are really reliable. Barb McQuaid and Joyce Vance. And, you know, we have former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti and then former FBI Special Agent Asha Rangappa is really good at her analysis and her understanding of all things law. Lawrence Tribe, Glenn Kirshner, who you mentioned at the top of the show. There's so many independent journalists out there, citizen journalists and analysts who really have kind of taken over this space, or I should say supplemented in a very good way the mainstream media. Because we are allowed to speculate, and talk about hypotheticals. Mm-hmm. And so those are some of the folks I rely on. And then there's some incredible reporters like Hugo Lowell, The Guardian, Kyle Cheney, Anna Bauer, Zoe Tillman, just some really good Carol Leonnig. There's just so many great reporters out there that do work for mainstream outlets that really get really important and incredible stories to the public that are complete, because sometimes they half them, they come out incomplete in some of these other major outlets. And that's what I like about some of these more thorough reporters. So it runs the gamut.
I have seen you disagree respectfully with a lot of people who you respect. It does seem that even right now in this podcast with you and I, you would hold your fire at naming names of people whose analysis you really generally don't like. And we're not talking about like fascists and assholes. We're talking about people who are kind of mainstream, maybe corporate, I don't know, whatever, media, legal types. Like you're not naming names of the people now or ever that you really don't think are great.
Well, there are some people who sometimes I disagree with, but generally I agree with mostly. I had a little back and forth with like Harry Littman, who's an incredible analyst, and I've had him on my show many times, and we agree on a bunch of stuff. But there was a bit of speculation about, maybe Jack using Florida as a venue in the documents case because of a possible Supreme Court case that we just got the ruling for, where you don't lose your whole case if you have to change venue. And I pushed back a little bit respectfully on that. I said, I think Jack Smith picked Florida because that's where the crimes happened. Some people will say, well, the documents were stolen from D.C., but he left the White House 2 hours early. He was still president when he took those documents. All of the obstruction and the retention happened down in Florida. And I think that's just the appropriate venue. There could be other stuff coming in D.C. in the documents case. There could be stuff coming in New Jersey in the documents case. Maybe the documents case is done. We still have January 6th. We still have wire fraud on the big lie. There's so many other things going on. But I'm always encouraged by people like Harry Littman to have those discussions and have them in the public square so that people can come to their own conclusions about these things. We're all on the correct side, but we, just these kind of little speculative bits. I've had disagreements about the pace of the investigation with incredible people like Ellie Honig, who wrote Hatchet Man, which is an incredible book. Everybody should read that. And he's got a new book out too. So everybody who I might have minor disagreements with are always people I have incredible and huge amounts of respect for. I mean, Harry Libman worked at the Department of Justice.
Yeah, Harry's great. Yeah,
Attorney General. That guy knows so much more than me about so many things. So it's not. It's I just want to keep everything.
I like the way that you handle yourself on the Twitter, on the podcast, and I like the way that you talk about things. I'm getting very aroused hearing you talk about the legal implications. I love it. I think you're so analytical and thoughtful and nuanced. So let me get to a little bit of that too for future and sustainable arousal, which is Russia and Mueller. And I think we should. To me, people are like, well, I don't want to relitigate the Russia-Trump. No, I want to relitigate it forever, all the time. I want to bring it back all the time. It's the most important thing to me. It should never go away. It's like the Iraq War or the financial crisis. Let's keep reminding people what happened, and let's keep reminding people who's responsible for it. So when my basic question is to you to help people out. When folks say today that there was no Russian collusion between Donald Trump, his campaign, and Russia, what is your response to that, given the fact that you covered this granularly?
Well, there was tons of collusion. Collusion is not a term of legal art.
Yeah.
He couldn't amass enough evidence to prove conspiracy, criminal conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt, and not just beyond a reasonable doubt to obtain a conviction, but to maintain it on appeal. And that was because of all the obstruction that took place. And then when people want to know why we didn't charge him for obstruction after he was no longer president, as Mueller testified to in Congress that you could, Bill Barr wrote a secret memo, had an OLC memo written up that said, even if he wasn't president, we can't charge him in this case because there is no underlying crime of conspiracy and you can't obstruct an investigation into a crime that didn't happen. That, of course, is ridiculous. But it makes it harder for the Department of Justice, and Bill Barr closed that case. It makes it harder to reopen it and relitigate it when you've got an Office of Legal Counsel memo saying from a former attorney general, right or wrong, that says you can't be prosecuted for it. Yeah. And so the thing that makes this indictments case so very, very dreamy and delicious is that there is an underlying crime to the obstruction, because this whole indictment is about the musical boxes, the obstruction. They're trying to hide the documents, but there is an underlying crime, and that's 793E, Title 18, under the Espionage Act, retention of national defense information, 31 counts. So we have an underlying crime. We don't have to worry about the Bill Barr memo. I
don't know how you just did that. I don't know how. That's what makes you. That's why your podcasts have been so successful, and it's why your Twitter feed is so huge. I don't know how your brain does that. I don't know how you recalled. You didn't know I was going to ask you about Russia collusion. That wasn't some kind of weird talking point that you had written down. You literally just, who are you?
I'm AG.
Well, very modest. I get it. I understand. So, are there any, is there a document, is there a book, is there an essay that you think, obviously I think your podcast, Mueller, She Wrote, archived, if people really want to know the granularity of that case and everything that happened, is great, amazing. But is there anybody else that you think that has written about it or thought about it, the whole issue, and laid it out in a book or anywhere else that you think is really probably the standard?
Where Law Ends by Andrew Weissman is exceptional. Compromised by Pete Strzok, also very exceptional. And then just as an overview of whether you're talking about Russia or Saudi Arabia or China or anything like that, On Tyranny by Dr. Timothy Snyder. Is a staple in any library.
Yeah.
But read the Mueller report and read the indictment. These indictments and not just this one, but the future ones. They're written for you to consume. They aren't written for legal. They're not in legalese. They're very easy to read. They're called speaking indictments, and they lay out a perfectly understandable narrative about what happened.
So when we talk about the classified documents case, how do you think the media is, what are some of the criticisms of the way that's being framed inappropriately wrong, or in a way that doesn't really, I think, articulate the urgency or the you think about this Teixeira, this Air Force kid who's 21, who stole a couple of documents. You think about Reality Winner and others. And I think that's where we should compare. And I feel like the media is not getting the severity of this right. And I think because to some extent there's speculation as to what he was going to do with these documents. But the bottom line is we know this man. We know that he would sell anybody out as quickly as including his own blood. And he certainly doesn't care about the country. And he had all these documents, and we can assume and speculate why he had them and what he was planning on doing with them. But I feel like the media often doesn't get it right. And so I wanted to get your take on media's coverage of this.
Yeah, talk about media coverage, or what we see a lot of with the comparisons of Reality Winner. Reality Winner was hung out to dry and made an example of by a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, because Trump had a long history of wanting to shut everybody up about the Russia thing. I'm a perfect example of that. Andy McCabe, Pete Strzok, everybody who got fired, suing everybody that investigated, putting Durham on to investigate the investigators. And Reality Winner, it leaked to the press. She disseminated classified information, but it was information about the hacking of the DNC by Russia. And they wanted to make an example out of her, and Trump was very upset because he doesn't want any truth to come out about Russia. He even had Bill Barr make inappropriate redactions to the Mueller report. A federal judge found that Bill Barr made inappropriate redactions to the Mueller report and forced those redactions to be lifted. And what those redactions did was they curtailed the scope and the breadth and the depth of Russian interference. And now those are off, so you can read it all for yourself now. Everyone's like, when's the full Mueller report out? It's out. So that's what happened with Reality Winner. And the way they treated Reality Winner was wrong. And we shouldn't want to treat someone else wrong just because someone was treated wrong. Teixeira, he was disseminating information. Donald Trump in this indictment has not been charged with transmitting or disseminating information. There's no reason to remand him in prison for something he's not being charged with. That is something that they do in actual banana republics. And we don't want to be that way. The way that we should be looking at our two-tier system of justice, which definitely exists, is that instead of treating everybody like we treat people wrongly and lowering the bar, we should be treating everybody. We should lift everybody up and treat everybody the way we're treating Donald Trump. Does that make sense? Everyone should be treated equally under the law, and everyone should be treated equally under the law at the best level. We shouldn't be lowering it down.
Yes, everything that you say makes sense today and on your podcast daily. Yes. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a way to put that on a bumper sticker, but it's too many words.
I love the idea that you would spend a lot of time on how do I get this? Maybe I should do a magnet. Maybe it should be a patch.
That's one of the great things about Jack Smith and his word economy. I guess I learned from a lawyer friend of mine that there's an old phrase that if I had more time, I'd have written a shorter letter.
I love that. What do you think of Jack Smith vis-a-vis other special prosecutors, say Robert Mueller?
Well, Robert Mueller had a real hard time. He couldn't look at the finances. He had to hand a bunch of stuff off. By the way, the first indictment of Donald Trump came from the Mueller probe. The Cohen hush money scheme began under the Mueller investigation. It was handed off to the Southern District of New York. Barr shut it down, and it was picked back up by the DA. So Mueller is not useless. I know a lot of people think that he is, but Rod Rosenstein came in and curtailed his scope. He was under the threat of being fired multiple times. And his goal, as far as I could tell, was to get all the information and facts down while it was still fresh in everybody's mind, and just to have it in the record. And then if Congress wants to impeach, or if you want to try to indict him after, or whatever, that's, because I'm not going to indict him, because there's an Office of Legal Counsel memo that says I can't indict a sitting president. But that was his job, was to get everything down and on the record as best he could. And he did that. And his report is an incredible piece of writing. And I think it's so important that we all understand that. And we've all read it. But, I can't stress enough that Jack Smith does not have a Bill Barr to contend with. He is not under the threat of being fired. His scope is humongous. He's subpoenaing stuff about the Live Golf Tournament. He's subpoenaing stuff about real estate transactions Donald Trump had in 7 countries. His scope is so huge, and nobody's coming in to narrow it, and nobody's threatened to fire him. And his report won't be spun when it comes out. I mean, unless it comes out after the election and y'all don't vote. So make sure.
Yeah, no, his report won't be spun. You're talking about the fact that Mueller's report was spun by Barr, the AG at the time. Merrick Garland's not going to do that. What do you think of Merrick Garland? It's really interesting to see your patient, more conservative, thoughtful take on a guy like Merrick Garland. You're in the camp of let's wait, just give it time.
I think that he probably took a couple too many steps that he didn't have to take.
Okay.
From what I can put together, in January of 2021, right after the attack on the Capitol, the Department of Justice Inspector General opened an investigation into the Department of Justice former officials and whether or not they tried to overturn the 2020 election. Like we're talking about Donahue and Rosen and, of course, Jeffrey Clark.
Donahue.
Yeah, Donahue took those handwritten notes.
Who's Donahue?
He was Rosen's deputy.
Got it.
So acting assistant deputy director, something, some big old title. But he was on the kind of side of the normies, I guess, if you're going to go with, the Rudys versus the Hirschmans of the world, or the Pat Cipollones, those guys. But I think something that, so anyway, about almost a year later, Merrick Garland testifies to Congress that the IG is doing an investigation and he will take the recommendations of that. I think shortly after that, what happened was they came back with recommendations and criminal referrals from what happened at the DOJ. That's when in January of 2022, Merrick Garland put Wyndham in charge of looking at the high-profile, politically charged cases like January 6th, and not the boots on the ground, but the generals. So the real investigation didn't start until January of 2022, and I think Merrick Garland was trying to insulate himself from making that decision himself by having the Inspector General tell him, who's a nonpartisan, that he has to do it.
Oh, interesting.
I don't think that was necessary. I don't think that almost year delay was necessary, which is where I agree with a lot of folks on. But one of the things that you asked me about is what the MSM and mainstream media seems to get wrong, is that a lot of people think Jack Smith did all of this by himself, particularly in the documents case. And I can go on about January 6th forever because they were investigating Trump since January of 2022. But in the documents case, the whole entire subpoena and search warrant and decision about executing the search warrant, all of that came from Merrick Garland. So he's measured. He's very trying to be so apolitical. I think he's extremely afraid of giving the DOJ a black eye by overturning what Bill Barr did or, shaming Bill Barr in any way, which is frankly a little bit disappointing. But he gets to the right place. It just takes a long time. Like the E. Jean Carroll case, Bill Barr said the DOJ is going to represent Trump. Merrick Garland came in and didn't appeal that decision. But once a complaint came in, he immediately go, "Oh, we withdraw. We don't have to represent Trump anymore because you're amending the complaint." Right. And we still don't know what their final decision is on that. But I'm thinking this gives Merrick Garland a chance to say we're not going to rep Trump in the E. Jean Carroll one case.
Yeah, I remember the disappointment and the outrage with a lot of people over that. Yeah.
Me too. So, that's something, Jack Smith didn't do all of this. I think of him as the closer. You wouldn't be in the ninth inning ahead to bring a closer in if it weren't for your previous pitchers. If it weren't for Merrick Garland, you wouldn't have a
that
Jack.
is a really, that's what I like about your take on things. It's just so much nuance. Do I like everything he's done? Obviously not. Did I think he was wrong here? Yeah. Do I understand why he had to do this? Yeah. I mean, it's really thoughtful. So you're now also hosting, I don't know, there must be more than one of you, but you're hosting Jack along with the Daily Beans, and you're hosting that with Andrew McCabe, which is so cool. And, so he must be, do you think he listens? Do you think Jack Smith listens to the podcast?
Well, later on, I found out that pretty much everybody in the Mueller investigation that shouldn't be swayed by certain things knew about the Mueller podcast. I don't think that it's probably not wise for Jack Smith to listen to my podcast, politically speaking. Just probably not. I'm sure he knows about it.
He definitely knows about it. I know that he knows about it. Okay, I just wondered if I could get you on someone back channeled you like Jack Smith listens to your podcast. He's really getting a lot from it. My big, I guess, last question, I don't know, I guess I have to let you go, which is disappointing.
Oh, and I also do cleanup on aisle 45 with Peter Strzok.
Yeah, I forgot to even mention that. There's just so much. Do you sleep?
Depends on the news day.
I'm just, all right. Peter Strzok and Andrew McCabe, you basically are working with, which is just to really, we could talk about that for an hour. The big question I have right now here, and take as much time as you want with it, because I haven't seen, and I don't understand, and I follow these things closely, and I talk to experts every day about the January 6th case and Jack Smith. And initially, correct me if I'm wrong, that's what he was appointed to look at. And then the classified documents case came later. The classified document, correct me on the chronology in Jack Smith, but the bottom line is the classified documents case is such a slam dunk because there's audio, and it's just a pretty easy thing for people, the public to understand, a grand jury to understand. But the January 6th case is different. And for that, Allison, I feel like I haven't heard that much about Jack Smith's work on that. And I really want to get your thoughts on that. And obviously, if people are interested in that, they should listen to the podcast.
Yeah, we had some big January 6th investigation news this week that we'll talk about on this Sunday's Jack. But Jack Smith was appointed to look at January 6th, the documents. He was appointed to look at the documents case and finish that, and also obstruction of justice that may arise from those two things. Now, he's since expanded that. He's now one of the things I think that, but it was already being investigated, is he's looking into Trump's super PACs. He's looking at the Live Golf Tournament. He's looking at real estate transactions. The big lie was the fundraising on the big lie. Fraudulent. That's wire fraud. That's 20 years. That's an open and shut case right there. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some pretty quick indictments on that.
Really?
But where we're at with the January 6th case is it's a very complicated case. We know that Judge Carter, a judge in California, who ruled that John Eastman's emails had to be turned over to the January 6th Select Committee in Congress, determined that the crime fraud exception pierced the veil of attorney-client privilege because John Eastman and Donald Trump, more likely than not, committed Title 18, 1512C2, obstructing an official proceeding, and 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States. So those are pretty easy. Whether he goes with seditious conspiracy or insurrection or inciting an insurrection, I don't know. Those are harder cases to prove. But when Merrick Garland came forward and hit those Oath Keepers and Proud Boys with seditious conspiracy, I was frankly shocked. That's a baller move because we haven't won a seditious conspiracy case in decades in this country. It's not a big winner, but he secured the convictions, and that's.
Yeah, there's not a lot of, people don't care as much because they're the soldiers. And so people want, the leaders of the plot to be taken down, and they're not satisfied. But I am. I mean, satisfied is not the word, but it's such a big deal, those cases that they were tried on those charges and that they won. They were convicted, right? Like, I don't know how to describe how big of a deal that is, but I think that part of it, this is just speculation, it's just commentary, who knows, you can't prove this, is why we don't have more violence and more people in Miami this week or in Manhattan before. I actually think those prosecutions mattered, and they reduce violence. They don't end violence. That'll never be the case, but they reduce the possibility of somebody leaving their decent life for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and one of the reasons in the sentencing recommendations for the Oath Keepers to
Are you impressed with my analysis just now?
I was very impressed. To go above and beyond the sentencing guidelines was for the reason of deterrence. So, you see people getting 17 years, 15 years, 12 years for what happened at the Capitol. I agree. I think that's why only, tens of people showed up to Miami.
And they didn't do anything. They were LARPers.
Yeah. The guy with the pig and the smoking pig.
Fine. That's good. It's creative. Give them points. Sure.
It's peaceful, no mob violence. Plus, I think Miami PD was ready for like 50,000.
Oh, yeah.
Going to happen.
Yeah.
So, that also helps. But yeah, I think the DOJ is really deterrent there. And that's the next case. That's the next test here. And, a lot of thoughtful people like Andrew Weissman, for example, are pretty certain now that since Jack Smith went ahead and issued these indictments, that there's 100% chance that he'll issue indictments against Trump for January 6th.
Oh, I have not heard this.
Yeah.
100% indictments on January 6th. And that can only mean, based on what I've learned over the past few years, that if they're going to indict him on this, it's because they think they can win. They're sure. I'm sorry. That's true of most prosecutors in most crime. They think they can win. But it's with former president of the United States and with everything that's at stake, and it's a lot, they have to be almost guaranteed. I mean, certainly.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say about that Judge Carter thing where he said Trump did, obstruct an official proceeding beyond, or more likely than not, preponderance of the evidence. For them to say that about a former president and a former president's attorney and peers attorney-client privilege, that it's probably more than probably. You know what I mean? It's probably, they probably had a higher standard in their head.
Wow, that's huge. I had not heard it quite put that way. All right, then before you go, Fani Willis, Georgia, that's the reason why that we know that's going to come down is because the overt public requests for security around a certain time. And one of the people from the person that was on the grand jury that got her 15 minutes of fame screaming about, you won't be surprised by what you learn here maybe a month ago, right? Like those two pieces of evidence to me say that's happening.
There's a third piece of evidence. Fani Willis sent teams of people to assess the security at New York when he was indicted and down in Miami when he was indicted. And you don't send a team of people to two Trump arraignments to prep your security.
Is it possible she made it pretty public that she sent a team of people?
Yeah, right. And you don't also tell everybody that you're doing this if you are going, because you're not going to want to go see how the public reacts to a Trump arraignment for an indictment against Rudy. It doesn't make any sense. So she's going to announce.
When does Rudy go by now?
She's going to
announce. A lady name, I think. Tracy or something?
I think second week of August, because she's pulling all of her people the last week of July, and then the court is on recess the first week of August, and then I think she's going to bring people in and announce her indictments in the second and third week of August. That's just my personal speculative guess. I don't have any insider knowledge other than what's being publicly reported. But she has also said she, even though Tish James told Pod Save America that she would probably adjourn her case, Fani Willis said, no, I'm not adjourning my case. I'm not waiting until the indictments case is done.
Different sitch. Yeah,
it's different. We'll see what happens if he comes down, if Jack Smith indicts on January 6th before Fani Willis announces. She's still going to announce her indictments. You still want to file your indictments, get them out there under the statute of limitations. Then she might sit and wait and see. Or, her court docket could take 18 months. It's really packed down there. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this unfolds and plays out. But there's going to be a lot more indictments, and justice is coming.
Not enough Allison Gill to do a podcast called Fani.
She wrote.
But just to remind people, that case is about if you could just give me 11,005, I just need to find. It's about his interference in Georgia's election count and everything around that. And it's a slam dunk. Because, again, there's tape.
I think it's going to be racketeering, and I think it's going to have probably three main branches. The fraudulent elector scheme, and it could include multiple states, and then, the DOJ utilization, and then the personal interference with the calls to Raffensperger and stuff like that. We'll see how it shakes out. That's just my guess. But that's going to be a big case, and it might look a lot like what Jack Smith does. We'll have to wait and see. It's going to be really, really interesting to see how all this goes. And now he just got slated for the E. Jean Carroll 1 case in January.
It's unbelievable. Everybody's just doing all kinds of just hot takes on how stupid he is. He's his own worst enemy. And
please feel free to celebrate. This is what we have been waiting. This is one of the reasons we voted, was so that we could get justice. Don't celebrate that there's classified documents out there, threatening national security. No, that's sad and sobering.
Right.
But that the rule of law is working in this country.
No, I think as you were talking, I was going to say something. I was like, I don't know what people think of this, and I don't really give a shit. But history may look back at Merrick Garland and the Institute of the Department of Justice under Joe Biden and Merrick Garland and say, you know what, they did everything they needed to do. It may look back that way, and it'll be a long time. And so just to fast forward, the final question is timelines. That's what everybody's doing right now. Timeline predictions, and there's got all kinds of experts that, I guess former federal prosecutors would probably be the best people. Anybody who's worked at DOJ in terms of, anybody understands how the schedules of these work. And obviously this one matters because Donald Trump is running for president and he's going to be up. Allison, what do we expect from the next is it 18 months or something, however many days before the election, in terms of the legal, the cases, ongoing cases for Donald Trump while he's running for president. Primaries happening.
Yeah, a lot about the documents case is going to depend on what Aileen can and can't do. Can and can't do. She can delay things by setting long briefing schedules or trying to throw things out that'll have to be appealed. Some of these things can automatically be appealed under SEPA to the 11th Circuit, but it still takes a couple of months. Her special master thing delayed this whole thing by 3 months.
Good point. Really important point.
It's going to be hard. I mean, it depends on who the judges are in these cases. I think we're at the end of the January 6th case. We had a couple of people come in and testify. One guy from Nevada who was a fraudulent elector who had his phone seized a while back came in and testified to the grand jury. That says to me, cooperating witness, not target. And it sounds like that might be a little wrap up. We've already had Pence. We've already had Meadows. We've already had all the big names come in and testify, overcoming executive privilege, which, by the way, Merrick Garland is the one who paved the way for that. And so I think we're at the end of it. And I think we'll see a January 6th indictment. And I don't know if it's for Trump but the generals the charging decisions will be made. I think here maybe before Fani Willis makes her charging decision.
Who are you speculating are the generals? Meadows?
Meadows, whether he's cooperating or not, definitely Eastman, Jeff Clark, I think is in trouble, Rudy Giuliani, possibly Sidney Powell. I mean, there's so many people that were all the fraudulent electors who aren't cooperating, could be in quite a bit of trouble. But I think he's mostly done with that case. Like I said, I think these last few witnesses are either new cooperators or they're bringing in witnesses to shore up potential defenses as opposed to the main crux of the investigation into the crimes. So, we'll see what happens, but it's going to be a hot girl indictment summer. And I think Fani and Jack Smith will go right around the same time on January 6th.
Well, if it's going to be a hot girl indictment summer, that means that you are not going to have much of a summer.
No, but that's okay. I'm more of a winter person.
Well, all right. Final hacky question. Do you think we ever see Donald Trump in a Supermax facility with a Secret Service agent accompanying him to the shower?
No, I don't. I'm one of those folks who thinks that he will probably get home detention if he is convicted of any of these crimes, because it's just so difficult logistically to have. He gets Secret Service Secret Service for life. He gets a pension for life. Can't change that. So it's going to be difficult, those logistics. So I see sort of that happening, but who knows? Maybe Jack Smith is like, nah, bro, you're going to prison. He might recommend he goes to prison, but the judge could have a different idea.
Will you donate your brain to science?
Sure.
Right here, you've said it legally on this podcast. So,
okay.
I mean, I think that's legal permission.
I was telling my co-host on Mueller, I'm like, can we freeze my head so that I can be woken up when the grand jury materials of the Mueller investigation are released in 50 years? I would really like to see them.
I think it's hilarious that it's going to be you and Ted Williams looking at the grand jury investigation. Hopefully people got that. Wait, what is that about? What do you want to know?
The grand jury material, right before the Mueller first indictments came down, right before I started the podcast, we got the Watergate grand jury material. And so it's going to be a while before.
Why do you want? What would be in that you would be of interest to you?
Oh, all of the interviews, the crimes that they were looking at, why they weren't able to charge them, or the testimony they got. If there was a true bill vote on an indictment that didn't happen, or for some reason didn't make it, or if there were indictments that were voted on that weren't actually brought to the public and filed under seal, never to be seen again. Just all that grand jury stuff that has to be secret for a very long time.
I'll reach out to your people to get you back on in another whatever time period, because this was unbelievably interesting to me, and I'm sure everybody's going to love it. And I'll plug everything that you're doing again on the way out. I thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to see. I mean, if I have to edit this out, but Netroots is going to be a thing that we're going to be both together. I think July 14th is the date. in Chicago?
Yeah, we're going to do a panel. We're going to do a justice panel. And Jill Wine-Banks, Victor Shi, Renato Mariotti, you and me. And I think we might have some comedy. There'll be a bar. It's going to be
very exciting. So we'll be in Chicago together, and I'm looking forward to that. That's because you invited me, and I can't thank you enough. I'm really excited to have this on-the-record conversation. Look forward to more. Thank you, AG. Really an honor.
Thanks.
There she goes, everybody. Allison Gill. Go check her out. Dr. Allison Gill. Go listen to all her podcasts. Go support MSW Media. See us in Chicago at Netroots on July 14th. And that is all I've got for you on today's episode of Stand Up. Again, sorry I don't have all the extras with the news and more, but lots of responsibility to the family this week. So I'm going to be focused on that while getting all these great guests to join me on the show. So thanks for your patience and your support. If you haven't signed up for a paid subscription, please do right now. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic or standupwithpete.com if you can't remember it. Give a review on Apple and Spotify. That would be really thoughtful. If you haven't already, please go do that. And here is your quote of the day from Henry David Thoreau. If a man does not keep pace with his companion, perhaps it's because he hears a different drummer. Ooh, I like that. And rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth. Henry David Thoreau. Good stuff. Thank you. John Carroll, sing us out.
Stand up, you gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Oh, got to stand